Um,
Hello, everyone. My name is Ned Dennis, and I'm the chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. And I have with us today Elaine Howley. Elaine, please say hello.
Hi there.
Our sport has been blessed by a number of dedicated researchers, and a lot of those researchers are honorees of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. I'll give you some examples. Three book authors: Conrad Wienerberg. His book is Wind, Wave, Sunburn: A Brief History of Marathon Swimming. Joe Grossman, A History of Marathon Swimming. Dr. Tim Johnson, DPSPE, History of Open Water Marathon Swimming. We then take a look at some of the honorees that have been involved in social medias and what I call records assembly. So Stephen Munatonis, the Daily News, Open Waterpedia, and the early Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame website. Evan Morrison, Long Swim Database. Julian Critchlow put together the incredible records on the English Channel. Plus, we have to talk about the people who helped start these federations and associations around the world. And I'll just give you one example. Henri Penniline Dean put together the history of the swims for the Catalina Channel Swimming Federation. So more recently, Elaine has been tearing up the place. She's an accomplished marathon swimmer and a writer. A combination is pretty rare. And she's been regularly writing really great in-depth articles on current and historic topics of marathon swimming and loads more. She's published in places like Swimmer Magazine and Outdoor Swimmer Magazine. So Elaine, please give the listeners the highlights of your marathon career, if you would please.
Yeah, so I got into marathon swimming in 2006. Started with the Boston Light here locally. Was a great entry point, and I am now the race director for that event. And so from there, we just sort of climbed the ladder. In 2009, I completed my Triple Crown. And then in 2016, I completed the Triple Crown of Monster Swims, which was a lot of fun. It was very hard, but it was a lot of fun. That's the length of Lake Memphremagog, which is 25 miles up in Vermont into Canada. The length of Loch Ness at 22 miles and extremely cold, and then a length of Lake Tahoe, which is also chilly and at altitude. So each one of those lakes has a monster. I kind of have a thing for lake monsters, so there you have it. Let's see, in 2014, I became the first person to swim the 32.3 mile length of Lake Pend Oreille in northern Idaho. And let's see, I've done a couple of ice miles. Yeah, what else? I was the first person to do a triple crossing of Boston Harbor on the Boston Light course, which was a lot of fun. I think that was 2019 when I did that. So yeah, that's sort of the highlights.
You also have some giving back to the sport, I call it. You mentioned Boston Light, so thank you very much. I enjoyed the swim under your direction a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Massachusetts. Tell us a little bit about the Marathon Swim Federation and Vermont Swimming Hall of Fame.
Yeah. So let's see, in 2009, I have to thank Greg O'Connor for a lot of what I have done in marathon swimming. He was the one who first suggested that I start training for the Boston Light Swim in 2006. I met him at the pool. He wanted to train. He kind of convinced me to do it with him. And before we knew it, we had inherited the event from the previous race director, as these things go. And so in I think it was 2012, Greg founded the Massachusetts Open Water Swimming Association. He has since retired. I took over the presidency for the organization in, gosh, I guess sometime mid-pandemic. So I think like 21 is when I officially took over, and he officially retired. So Mauza oversees the Boston Light Swim. We run a 1 mile race early in the season called the Jim Doty Memorial Mile that honors the legacy of legendary Hall of Fame swimmer Jim Doty, who was like a local legend. He's done everything in New England. And it's really fun because we coordinate with his daughters. His family are very involved in the organization of that event, and it's all for charity. And it's just a good time and a good entry level event for people who want to get out into open water. We also offer a range of solo swims, and we're really looking to sort of expand that with new offerings and stuff. So watch that space. There's more happening there. And we're actually hoping to launch a new a new group swim this fall called the Egg Rock Scramble. There's a there's a little island off the coast of the North Shore of Boston, called Egg Rock, and there used to be an event where they would go swim around it, and they called it the Egg Rock Scramble. So we're going to try and revive that historical event that I don't think it's been run since like 75. So we're kind of dipping into the archives on this one and seeing what we can organize. So going to do a trial run, hopefully this September, and hopefully next year we can open it up to anybody who wants to do it. So that's the Massachusetts lay of the land. I have been involved with the Marathon Swimmers Federation since, gosh, I guess 2014 was when I first got involved. Evan Morrison had reached out to me to assist in the writing of the rules, the official rules of marathon swimming as dictated by MSF. They wanted somebody with, a writing background to sort of assist to make sure that like the grammar was right and all of that. But it was really an interesting process, very collaborative process, and super valuable, I think, in the long run for finally writing down these rules that everybody has just sort of known intuitively for 100 and some years. So to finally like codify them, put them on paper, and say, look, no, this is when we talk about marathon swimming, this is what we mean. So ever since then, I've been involved with Marathon Swimmers Federation. I'm a member of the core group that assists with things like ratifying swims, and just trying to pass on opportunities to other people.
Elaine, tell us about the first in-depth article you did on marathon swimming. Back whenever it was, just the first article that I'm sure you remember.
Yeah, so I had to look this up because I don't remember. I've been doing this for such a long time now. I don't really remember what was actually like the first one. I have been writing, there's a column in Swimmer magazine that runs, it's the very last page of the magazine. It's called Splashback, and it's a historical topic related to something aquatic, something swimming. And I have been writing that since, oh gosh, 2009, 2010, sometime in that time period is when I sort of took over that column. So there was probably stuff that was open water related / marathon swimming related a long time ago. But in terms of like these more in-depth historical features that I've been doing for Outdoor Swimmer, that started in 2017. And I think the very first one of those, I pitched to Simon and Jonathan, who was the editor at the time. I pitched to them the idea of, well, there's this vast history to open water swimming and marathon swimming, and what do you think about like just letting me go spelunking in the archives and see what I find, and throw together a feature every month about some aspect that seems interesting? And they were like, yes. You can have 6 pages in each issue, go. It's like it's so fun that they just give me carte blanche to sort of dig into what I find interesting. And it's been like a real treasured opportunity. I mean, this is definitely my favorite work that I do. I do a lot of writing for a lot of clients, but these articles are absolutely my favorites. And I think the very first one of these in the history series was about the La Tuque, the 24-hour relay swim that they used to do up in Canada. And I was aware of it because Jim Doty had been involved in it one year, and he had told me, he took me out to lunch when Greg and I broke his double Boston Light record. And he told me this story about how they were getting chased. He was in the water. It was his turn on the relay, and he was swimming as fast as he could. And then there was something about the cops showed up, and they were trying to chase him out of the lake. And so he had to get out of the lake and jump in the car, and he had his kids in the car, and they took off. And it was like, a 3-town car chase with the police. And then he doubled back and he got back in the lake and finished his. It was just this crazy story. And I was like, okay, I need to dig in and find out what this thing was about. So I think that was the very first one.
So let me interject here a couple of things. I've had the pleasure of interviewing a number of honorees of IMSHOF. two of them told me stories, one publicly and one when we weren't recording, about great Latuque stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is where like there's two people, it's 24-hour marathon, and off you go. And your partner after an hour goes, I don't feel well.
Yeah.
And they disappear.
Yeah.
And the other person finishes it the 21, 23 hours all alone. But that's not the story. The person shows up to get their half of the prize money.
Of course.
And the story you tell about the cops, one of these days, I hope to interview Honoree Patty Thompson, who seemingly was the organizer of that particular swim, which I don't think was Latuque, but she did jail time.
Oh, no way.
So and I think this is some of the synergy that happens when different people are researching in different ways. The more research that happens and the more sharing that goes on, you get either closer to the truth or closer to a better story.
Right.
Elaine, what was the most recent open water history story you did?
So the outdoor swimmer that just came out, the digital issue got released last night, I think. That was a piece about the first Baron, Lord Desborough. He, better known as William Henry Grenfell, he was the first president of the Channel Swimming Association. But that's not all he did. Like, he was this great sportsman. He was a rower. He was a champion punter. And I had read Michael Lond's book, Lond, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, the Waterman. I had read that for an article I was writing for Swimmer magazine. And reading it, I'm like, Desborough, I know this name. I know this name. Why do I know this name? And it rang a bell because I had remembered reading about him from the Channel Swimming Association stuff at some point. And so I dug into it, and as the Waterman notes, he was super involved. Like, he was the driving force behind the 1908 London Olympic Games. So there's just like a really interesting guy. He also swam across the tide pool at Niagara Falls twice, because once wasn't enough. He went back and did it again. He was like a real like adventurer, sort of like a Teddy Roosevelt character without all of the American bluster. He was very refined gentleman and stuff, and this Edwardian figure, and just a really interesting guy. So in my tumble down the rabbit hole on that one, I discovered that there are two guys in Britain, Sandy Nairn and Peter Williams, who are writing a book, a biography of Desborough. And they were gracious enough to give me an interview, and they shared some of their findings with me, and just a really interesting thing, I mean, like, who was the first president of the Channel Association? Well, like, nobody knows that. Like, why would you know that? Like, but it's really interesting because it turns out he had his hand in so many sporting pies at that very critical moment in the 1920s, as marathon swimming was kind of coming into its first renaissance. There was just he was just everywhere.
And for the English, a punter is somebody who bets on sporting events. Is that what you meant by punter, or you meant somebody kicked the ball in the air?
No, I mean, it's a very specific English activity where it's a flat bottom boat.
Okay.
And they pole it down the river.
And poling, you might call it in America. Okay.
Yeah, it looks a bit like a gondolier in Venice, except for they go a lot faster.
Mostly
and it's
mostly around Oxford, Cambridge, up there somewhere.
Yeah, the Cam and the Thames and all of that, and just there's like, turns out there's this whole subculture of punting that I sort of dove into as part of the research for that article. So you just never know what you're going to find out when you start digging.
You need to move your camera down a tiny bit. We're losing
Sorry.
you. Perfect. And so you kind of have your first and your most recent story. what were your kind of couple of favorite stories, the more interesting characters, the more unusual? For example, I was looking at some Atlantic City footage from
Mhm.
25 years ago, and there was a black swimmer on the
Yeah,
starting blocks. I was
yeah.
going, you don't see that very often. And now I'm going back trying to get the name uh,
Hmm.
because it was just so unusual.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and there, I had dug in a little bit on the story of Pauline Jackson. She was a black swimmer in the 20s. She did the one in the Toronto, the World's Fair swim up there. And she was from New York City, and she had an interesting story. I also am a huge fan of Charlie Chapman. I think his story doesn't get enough airtime. First Black American to swim the English Channel, which he did in, I think it was 1981. um and he had to self-fund it. He didn't have a whole lot of support on this. And Naji Ali, who lives out in San Francisco, did this extraordinary interview with him back in, I think it was like 2011. And there's this video footage of Charlie telling the story of his channel swim. And that's, a real treasure to have. I mean, Charlie's sort of fallen off the face of the earth. Nobody seems to be able to find him right now, but to have that in the archive there is really cool. So his story is pretty cool. um I'm always really drawn to the stories of the women who've, kind of against all odds succeeded. And I'm a big fan of Florence Chadwick's story. um
This is the
she
one who showed up indiscreetly dressed on the shore in Boston and was arrested.
No, that's Annette Kellerman. That's
Oh,
Annette
sorry.
Kellerman.
There were
Yeah.
so many of them back then.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of scandal. Revere Beach seemed to attract them. Come to think of it, it still does. The scandalous swimsuits are definitely still a thing up there. No, but Florence Chadwick, she was from California. And she was twice divorced, which was really unusual we're talking late 40s, mid to late 40s here. To be twice divorced was, not a thing then. Um, and she was working in her mom's restaurant as a bookkeeper. She had been a very good swimmer as a kid, but wasn't quite good enough to make the Olympics. And she just decided that she wasn't going to just spend the rest of her life in this restaurant in San Diego. So she saw an ad in the newspaper. It was placed by Standard Oil, and they said, we need typists and secretaries in Saudi Arabia. So she answered the ad, um, landed the job, goes to Saudi Arabia for 2 years, just up and moves. Didn't even tell her parents she was doing this. Just the day she left, she was like, by the way, I'm going to Saudi Arabia for 2 years. Her mom basically disowned her, stopped talking to her after that because she was so angry. She managed to keep a relationship with dad. But so she ships off and she's working for Standard Oil in the Gulf. And she just socked away all of the money she earned. She would bribe some of her male coworkers with cases of beer to drive her to the beach before and after work so she could swim. Because of course, in Saudi Arabia, women couldn't drive there until what, 2018. So she and it's a dry country, so beer was definitely a valuable commodity for these expat American guys who were going to take her wherever she needed to go. And they would sit on the dock and drink beer, and she would tether herself to the dock and swim in place for 3, 4, 5 hours, whatever it took. So she did this for basically 2 years, saved up enough money. When her contract is up, she gets on the steamer that's going to take her home. And one of the reasons why she went with this in the first place was because the return trip was via France. So the steamer gets to France, she gets off the boat, doesn't get back on, stays there, starts poking around trying to find, she wants to swim the channel. She can't find, she's not sure how to go about getting a pilot and stuff. So she's just in France finding people to ask. She actually wrote to Sam Rocket and asked, he's another chronicler of stuff. And I get this, I haven't written about him yet, but I get the sense that he's a big character. So I haven't cleared enough time to go down that rabbit hole yet. But she reaches out to him and says, I want to swim the channel as part of the Daily Mail race, or this was the 1950 outing, so it would have been the first time they did this. And he was like, we have no idea who you are, no, you can't come in. They rejected the application, and so that pissed her off. So she finally finds a fisherman who will take her, and she goes and swims the channel from France to England about 2 weeks before the swim, and she breaks the men's record and totally scoops the race. Like, she stole all of their thunder, because she's this statuesque, beautiful woman with a lot of poise, and she's very camera friendly. And and she decided she was just going to do it. And I love the concept of just saying, hey, you know what, this life isn't working for me, and just pick up and move and find a way to make it yours. And then she went on to become, if you adjust for inflation, according to some estimates, she became the highest paid female athlete of the 20th century, because she got all kinds of endorsement deals, like for Janssen and Catalina Swimwear and Coca-Cola and everybody.
So what first attracted you to the woman who could be bribed with cases of beer?
Not a clue, Ned, not a clue.
Um,
I was like, oh, she's taking a page out of my book. Okay.
So Elaine, you and I have had the benefit of being able to get on an airplane, fly around the world, have an organization in place that's
Yep.
going to supply an observer and a boat that usually had ALS and GPS and an AED and somebody who knew something about something. And we had these special carbo drinks that could, in theory, fuel us. Just give me some of your favorite things from the past, that the challenges that swimmers face that we haven't a clue about.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it comes back to the GPS piece. I mean, I've come across these stories. So, what was her name? Linda McGill. I believe she's an IMSHOF honoree,
She is.
Australian woman. When she was there was a race from mainland Rhode Island to Block Island. This was, I think it was the 1962 race, but don't quote me on that. I would have to double check it. But anyway, there's like 10, pro swimmers. This was like a big deal event with like, I think not Helmy, the Abu Haif, I think he was
Abu Haif,
there. Yeah. And there were a couple other like big names who were there. And so she's swimming along. Now, in her book, she says she was swimming it naked, which is like, okay, first off, okay, that's interesting, because like the swimsuits at the time were too, swimsuit technology has come such a long way. So that, is like, that's a whole Zoom call all on its own about swimwear evolution. So she says she's naked and she's swimming to Block Island, and like a fog rolls in or the conditions deteriorate and she loses the boat. And then she sees a shark fin, and she's near, because it is a pretty sharky area there. And she sees there's this channel marker buoy that, is like, it's a major navigational buoy in the area. So she sprints to that, climbs up on it as this shark is circling. And so the kid, and I'm garbling this out. This is pulling this out of my memory here. You all might want to go read her book, because it's a fabulous read. The kid who was piloting her was like an 18-year-old kid, and he was just like, oh, well, and he took off. Like, he left her there. He wouldn't let her back in the boat. And so she's naked on this buoy with a shark circling. And she's like, what the hell am I supposed to do? And so eventually she flagged down like another boat or something, and got where she needed to go safely. But it was like, just the the concept there that this was like a pro race and there was so little infrastructure in place that, one of the competitors is stuck on the main channel buoy trying to not get eaten. Like, yeah, that doesn't really happen very often today.
So
Hopefully.
I did have the pleasure of interviewing Linda a couple of years ago, and I also interviewed Dr. David Smith, who was at least having a relationship with her at the time, whether that boyfriend, girlfriend, who knows.
Right.
And he was on the boat when she did the English Channel. It did confirm that she certainly was topless, getting in and getting out to the delight of the boat crew.
Of course.
There also is a famous picture in that Block Island swim of one of the swimmers with a great white just a
Yes.
few feet away. And for years and years, it was falsely attributed to swimmer X.
Mhm.
And during one of the interviews, we found no. Somebody said, no, that was me. And you can tell because the photographer was my brother-in-law by name of X.
Oh,
And,
wow. That's so cool.
it often happens in these that the media picks up something, and for 40, 50 years, the incorrect story continues to be out
That's
there, but
right.
it takes a bit of digging. Um, how do you go about actually researching?
Um, a lot of it is just reading, like, and the fun thing about marathon swimming is that most of us know each other, and it's always been that way. It's a pretty tight community, and like you'll read something like Linda's book, and she'll mention 4 or 5 other swimmers during the course of it, and it's like, oh well, I don't know that person. You sort of, it's sort of like you're taking these little tributaries off. So a lot of it is just like over the years of reading more about different people, you uncover interesting little tidbits or interesting stories. I mean, I was writing, for example, I was writing a story about Jack London, the writer. He was a big swimmer. And in the course of researching that, I discovered the story of I think it was Glover, a Boston-based swimmer, who actually faked his own death by marathon swim to avoid getting served divorce papers. Like, okay, I have questions. How the hell do you do that? So, it's things like that. It's just you're reading, you're researching one thing, and then all of a sudden something else jumps out from like a newspaper article or somebody's blog somewhere in some far corner of the internet, and it's just like, oh, okay, I'm going to poke on that because that looks really interesting.
And I'm curious, we had a case a couple of years ago where we were trying to put together the list of honorees who had been in the Olympics or had a serious involvement in the Olympics. And Steve Munatonis at the time said, let's dig a little bit deeper and let's find out which events they were actually in and how they did.
Mm-hmm.
So you go back to like 1963 or 60, I think Linda was in the Tokyo Games.
Yep.
And you find out she was in, heat 3 and got second. It was in the finals and got 6th, and in wet stroke it was and everything. And there was a guy in South America who was supposed to have been in 2 or 3 or 4 Olympics for. I'm hesitant to say the country, but I'm guessing it was Peru or something. So we went back to the Olympic records from 1928 or whatever the year was, and no, not in there. 1932, no, not in there. 1936, no, not in there. So it became one of these things where some reporter at one point decided that, so and so, was an Olympian. And back in the old days, everybody was a world champion because they were all professionals.
Right.
And the swim organizers, they would only organize world championship swim events to get them more money and big crowds, whatever. So everybody was a world champion. So throwing in an Olympic champion was, just it was easy enough. You just chuck it into the thing. And it was interesting that if you dig, the deeper and deeper and deeper you dig, you sometimes find some of the stories aren't quite what they are. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
You have a media license, which I think I should probably mention, which gives you some advantage. You have access to newspaper stuff all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a newspapers.com account that I pay for. I mean, it's one of my as an independent journalist, it's that and a couple of professional organizations that I'm a member of. It's all part of my business expenses
Yeah.
to do that. But yeah, I mean, I think the bigger thing is knowing where to look, you know. And something like newspapers.com makes my job so much easier because they aggregate a whole bunch of old newspapers. It's connected to ancestry.com. Because there is a lot of overlap with what I do and what like an ancestry researcher, what a genealogist might do. Because again, you're looking for that needle in the haystack of a name, and then you just follow that thread and find out. And then, so a lot of it is just getting into those archives and stuff. But your local library is a great place to go to because they've got access to all kinds of stuff. That you can do a LexisNexis. There's all kinds of databases out there that you can search that have, and like California has a wonderful trove of historic newspapers. It's all free online. You can just access it. And, so they're, and I know it's kind of controversial, especially among authors who, don't really want their work to be shared for free, but something like Google Books, that project where they were scanning all of these old books, things like that have been super helpful because, sometimes you'll stumble on something like, oh gosh, when I was writing about the tin can mail service in the South Pacific, I discovered that there was an autobiography of the guy who, sort of founded it, was sort of the most famous one of these swimming mailmen out there. And, he had written this book and it was published in like 1938 or something. And, I tracked it down and I actually got my local library. They got in touch with the San Francisco Public Library, who shipped it across the country so I could actually read the actual original book. Like, I mean, this thing has like literally been through the wars, this book. It's older than my mom, and oh sure, yeah, you can take it home for a month, have fun. Like, what? So I mean, all of
So,
that stuff is really cool.
so over time, occasionally I plant a seed for a story with you. I'm going to plant another seed and then I'm going to say goodbye. So
Okay.
Elaine, there is a book in you. The most
Yes.
interesting male characters in open water swimming. You've got the swimming mailman. You've got the beer bribing drivers. You've
Yep.
got the guy who faked his death for divorce. Dr. Tim Johnson has a character who was just some unbelievable person who said like, yeah, for $10 I'll jump off the Brooklyn Bridge kind of thing, and would do it.
Right.
So there have been some fascinating men and some scandalous women over the
Yes.
history of the sport.
Yes.
Maybe we should say interesting. So
Yeah.
there's a book in it for you.
Yeah, no, I know, and I've been trying. I mean, I have a book proposal that's been making the rounds that I don't know. Not everybody thinks this is interesting, Ned. We might be alone on that one.
Elaine Howley, thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you for all of the historic research and writing you've done. Uh, Open water swimming is a lot more than a distance and a time. A
Yeah.
lot of it's about the person out there kind of all alone doing the swim. What
Mhm.
stupid ideas have driven them to do it, and what stupid ideas and prayers keep them out there. So
Yeah.
thank you very much, Elaine.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks,
Take
Ned.
care. Bye.
Bye.